She wasn't a beauty queen turned narco-girlfriend. She wasn't a grieving widow forced into the family business. Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia was a logistics expert who happened to work for the Sinaloa cartel. Every week, she moved 3,500 pounds of marijuana and 30 kilograms of cocaine through Tijuana into the United States. She laundered the proceeds through a network of currency exchanges, skimming 3% off billions. She reported directly to Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, El Chapo's son. And for 7 years, she did this without firing a shot, without appearing in a corrido, without anyone outside the organization knowing her name. Invisibility wasn't her weakness, it was her strategy. The drug trade has always been imagined as a man's world. Scarface, El Chapo, Pablo Escobar. The narco corridos sing about men with gold-plated guns and armored convoys. The DEA's most wanted lists are dominated by male faces. The Netflix series focus on kingpins and their violent enforcers. But while the world watches the men, the Sinaloa cartel discovered something revolutionary. The most valuable operator in the drug trade is the one nobody's looking for. And in the early 21st century, that meant a woman. Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia understood this better than anyone. Between 2009 and 2014, she ran one of the most profitable cocaine and marijuana pipelines in North America. She didn't need an army. She didn't need a plaza boss title. She needed something far more powerful, the ability to move through the world without triggering the pattern recognition systems that law enforcement relies on. While her male counterparts were getting arrested in dramatic raids, their faces plastered across newspapers, La Patrona was processing $40 million a month through currency exchanges in Tijuana, living in a middle-class neighborhood, driving a Toyota. To understand how she did this, you need to understand why cartels began looking for people exactly like her. By 2006, Mexican President Felipe Calderón had launched his military offensive against the cartels. The violence was immediate and catastrophic. Over the next 6 years, more than 60,000 people would die. The old model, plaza bosses controlling territory through pure firepower, was collapsing under the weight of military pressure and inter-cartel warfare. The Sinaloa cartel, under the leadership of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, adapted faster than its rivals. They realized something critical. In a militarized environment, the most dangerous person isn't the one with the most guns. It's the one who doesn't look dangerous at all. This is where the economics become crucial. The cocaine trade from South America to the United States represents a market worth tens of billions of dollars annually. But that market only functions if the product moves. Tunnels get discovered, boats get intercepted, trucks get searched. The choke point isn't production. Colombian and Peruvian coca grows abundantly. The choke point is logistics. Specifically, the ability to move multi-ton quantities across the U.S.-Mexico border on a predictable, sustainable schedule. The Tijuana corridor, connecting directly to Southern California's massive drug market, is one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the criminal world. Controlling it means controlling billions, but controlling it visibly means painting a target on your back. Intelligence analysts suggest this is why the Sinaloa cartel began elevating women into operational command roles in the late 2000s. Not out of progressive values, this is an organization built on murder and corruption, but out of cold, strategic logic. Law enforcement profiling systems, border surveillance, even cartel rivals were calibrated to look for men. Specifically, men who fit the narco stereotype, flashy, violent, ostentatious. A woman managing logistics, living modestly, operating through legitimate business fronts, could move through the world with a freedom that male operators no longer possessed. Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia was the perfect embodiment of this strategy. The details of her early life remain murky. She didn't grant interviews, and the Sinaloa cartel doesn't publish organizational charts. What is known comes from federal indictments, DEA briefings, and court testimony from cooperating witnesses. She appears in the historical record around 2009, already embedded in the cartel's financial infrastructure. One can assume she wasn't recruited off the street. The Sinaloa cartel doesn't hand billion-dollar operations to outsiders. She likely had family connections or demonstrated competence in lower-level money laundering operations, or both. What matters is that by the time she reached operational command, she had earned the trust of Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, one of El Chapo's sons and a rising power in the organization. Trust in the cartel world is measured differently than in legitimate business. You don't get promoted for hitting quarterly targets. You get promoted because you've proven you can handle catastrophic consequences without flinching, because you understand operational security at an instinctual level, because you make the organization money without creating heat. Fernandez Valencia excelled at all three. Her role wasn't ceremonial. She wasn't a figurehead placed in position for optics. She was managing the actual movement of drugs and money, coordinating with smugglers, tunnel operators, and corrupt officials on both sides of the border. The logistics were staggering. Every week, approximately 3,500 pounds of marijuana and 30 kilograms of cocaine had to move from Sinaloa through Tijuana into the United States. This wasn't a one-time smuggling operation. This was industrial-scale trafficking requiring precision timing, coordinated transportation, and multiple redundancy systems. Standard procedure would involve compartmentalized cells, drivers who don't know the tunnel operators who don't know the warehouse managers who don't know the distribution networks on the U.S. side. La Patrona sat at the center of this web, coordinating movement without any single arrest being able to unravel the entire system. The Tijuana corridor offered specific advantages. The city is directly adjacent to San Diego, one of the busiest border crossings in the world. Millions of people and vehicles cross legally every year. The volume creates noise, statistical cover for illegal crossings. More importantly, Tijuana had been a Sinaloa stronghold since the cartel absorbed much of the weakened Arellano Felix organization's territory in the mid-2000s. This meant La Patrona wasn't operating in contested territory. She had access to established infrastructure, tunnels that had been dug over years, safe houses that had been used for decades, corrupt officials who had been on the payroll since the previous generation. But infrastructure alone doesn't move billions of dollars. That requires financial architecture capable of absorbing massive cash flows without triggering banking alerts or law enforcement scrutiny. This is where Fernandez Valencia's money laundering operation became critical. She controlled a network of currency exchanges in Tijuana, legitimate businesses with proper licenses, paying taxes, operating openly. These exchanges would process cash from drug sales on the U.S. side, converting it into pesos or wire transfers or other instruments that could be integrated into the legitimate economy. The cartel took a 3% commission on every transaction. When you're processing $40 million a month, 3% is over $1 million. That's not counting the profit from the drugs themselves. The beauty of this system, from a criminal perspective, was its simplicity. Currency exchanges and border cities handle enormous volumes of legitimate transactions. Workers sending remittances, tourists converting money, businesses conducting cross-border trade. A skilled operator could layer criminal proceeds into this flow, making detection nearly impossible without intensive auditing. And even if authorities did investigate, the paper trail would lead to a middle-aged woman with no criminal record, running what appeared to be a successful but unremarkable business. This is the tradecraft that separated La Patrona from the stereotypical cartel operator. She understood that in the 21st century, the most sophisticated criminal organizations don't look like criminal organizations. They look like import-export companies. They look like currency exchanges. They look like logistics firms. The violence, and make no mistake, the Sinaloa cartel is extraordinarily violent, happens in the background, enforcing territory and punishing betrayal. But the actual business of moving drugs and money increasingly resembles corporate supply chain management. Fernandez Valencia wasn't playing the role of a narco queen. She was functioning as a chief operating officer for a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise. Her operational security was exceptional. No corridos were written about her. She didn't appear in cartel propaganda videos. She wasn't on social media. She didn't wear designer clothes or drive luxury vehicles. Intelligence analysts believe this discipline came from both personal temperament and strategic calculation. The moment she became visible, she became a target. For law enforcement, for rival cartels, for ambitious subordinates within her own organization. Invisibility kept her alive and operational. For 7 years, this strategy worked perfectly. What broke her cover wasn't a mistake on her part. It was the cumulative weight of an organization under sustained pressure. By 2014, the Sinaloa cartel was fighting wars on multiple fronts. Against the Jalisco New Generation cartel, against the Zetas, against the Mexican military, against DEA operations on both sides of the border. When organizations are under that kind of stress, operational security degrades, lower-level operatives get arrested and cooperate, financial transactions get flagged by increasingly sophisticated monitoring systems. The network that seemed impenetrable begins showing cracks. Federal investigators likely identified her through financial analysis and testimony from arrested subordinates. Once they knew what to look for, the pattern became clear. Cash flowing through specific currency exchanges, wire transfers to specific accounts, transportation networks coordinating through specific nodes. She wasn't hiding through sophisticated encryption or counter-surveillance techniques. She was hiding through normality, blending into the background noise of legitimate commerce. But once investigators knew her name, that normality became evidence. February 9, 2016, federal agents surrounded her compound in Culiacan, the heart of Sinaloa cartel territory. By this point, she understood the mathematics of her situation. Running would accomplish nothing. She wasn't a Sicario trained in armed resistance, and Culiacan was surrounded by military checkpoints. Fighting would end her life in seconds. The only rational move was surrender because surrender meant the possibility of negotiation. When they breached the door, Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia was waiting calmly. She didn't resist. She didn't make threats. She was already thinking several moves ahead. The arrest photo shows a woman in her 40s, unremarkable features, no visible tattoos, no flashy jewelry. She looks like someone's aunt. The charges told a different story. Conspiracy to distribute multi-ton quantities of cocaine and marijuana, conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, wiretapped conversations, testimony from cooperating witnesses. She was facing life in prison. But she had one asset left: information. The extradition process took over a year. Mexico transferred her to U.S. custody in September 2017, and she was brought to Chicago to face federal charges. Chicago isn't a random venue. It's a major distribution hub for Sinaloa cartel operations, and federal prosecutors there had been building cases against the organization for years. What happened next reveals something crucial about how the U.S. justice system handles high-value cartel cooperators. Fernandez Valencia made a deal. The details of her cooperation remain partially sealed, but the outcome is public record. In 2019, she pleaded guilty to drug trafficking and money laundering charges. In exchange for what prosecutors described as substantial cooperation, she received a 10-year sentence, with time served from her arrest in 2016 counting toward that sentence. She was released in 2024. For a woman who moved billions of dollars in drug proceeds and facilitated the distribution of multi-ton quantities of cocaine and marijuana, 10 years is an extraordinarily light sentence. Federal prosecutors don't offer deals like that unless the information provided is extremely valuable. What did she give them? The exact details remain classified, but intelligence analysts can make educated guesses. She would have provided organizational charts: who reported to whom, how decisions were made, where money flowed. She would have identified corrupt officials on both sides of the border. She would have explained the technical details of the smuggling and money laundering operations, giving investigators a blueprint for dismantling similar networks. Most importantly, she would have provided testimony that could be used against higher-value targets, potentially including Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar himself. The Sinaloa cartel's response to her cooperation was notable for its absence. There were no public threats, no corridos condemning her betrayal, no reports of her family being targeted. This silence is strategic. Publicly acknowledging her cooperation would confirm its value and draw attention to whatever information she provided. More importantly, retaliating against her family would discourage future cooperation from other arrested operatives. The cartel operates on a long timeline. They can afford to let one operator walk away if it preserves the larger system. But La Patrona's story isn't an outlier. She's part of a larger pattern that law enforcement and media narratives consistently miss. Women have been integral to cartel operations for decades, but they're rarely visible in the way male operators are. Some are in traditional support roles: money couriers, accountants, safe house managers. Others, like Fernandez Valencia, hold genuine operational command. The Sinaloa cartel isn't unique in this regard. The Gulf Cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, even the older Colombian cartels all utilized women in critical positions. The difference is that these women rarely become public figures. They don't seek fame. They don't grant interviews. They operate in the shadows because the shadows are where the real work happens. This invisibility creates a distorted picture of how cartels actually function. The public narrative focuses on the violence, the beheadings, the mass graves, the military-style confrontations. That violence is real, and it's devastating. But it's not the business model. The business model is logistics, finance, and political corruption. It's moving product reliably, laundering proceeds efficiently, and maintaining relationships with corrupt officials. Women like Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia excel at these tasks precisely because they don't fit the stereotype of what a dangerous cartel operator looks like. The Pacific route she helped manage continues to evolve. The cocaine trade has become increasingly sophisticated since her arrest, with cartels deploying semi-submersible vessels and even fully submersible narco-submarines capable of traveling 10,000 miles without refueling. These vessels can carry up to 8 tons of cocaine, moving product from Colombian ports directly to the Mexican coast, bypassing the Caribbean interdiction zones entirely. The economics have shifted as well. While cocaine remains profitable, the cartel's focus has increasingly moved toward fentanyl, which is cheaper to produce, more potent, and generates higher profit margins. Intelligence analysts suggest the operational model La Patrona helped perfect. Low-visibility logistics networks managed by operators who don't match law enforcement profiles has been adapted for fentanyl trafficking. The human cost of these operations is almost impossible to calculate. Every kilogram of cocaine that moved through her network represented dozens or hundreds of individual addictions, family destructions, and potential overdose deaths. The violence that secured her supply chains killed thousands. Rivals, informants, innocent people caught in crossfire. The corruption that protected her operations undermined the rule of law in entire regions. She never pulled a trigger, but her fingerprints are on a vast architecture of human suffering. Yet she received 10 years, served 8, and walked free. This is the paradox at the heart of the cooperating witness system. The people with the most valuable information, the ones who can actually damage criminal organizations, are the ones who were deepest inside those organizations. They're not innocent. They're not victims forced into the trade. They're true believers and competent operators who made fortunes enabling addiction and violence. And when they're caught, they trade their knowledge for reduced sentences, walking away from consequences that their lower-level subordinates will serve decades for. There's no easy moral calculus here. Federal prosecutors would argue that Fernandez Valencia's cooperation led to additional arrests and disrupted cartel operations, potentially saving lives in the aggregate. Defense attorneys would argue she was a middle manager in an organization where refusing orders meant death, and that her cooperation demonstrated genuine remorse. Victims' families would argue that 10 years for enabling billions in drug trafficking is an obscene injustice. They're all correct. The drug trade doesn't offer clean narratives or satisfying resolutions. What La Patrona's story does offer is a window into how these organizations actually function beneath the mythology. Cartels aren't street gangs scaled up. They're sophisticated criminal enterprises with corporate structures, professional specialization, and strategic long-term planning. They recruit talent, promote based on competence, and adapt to changing market conditions. The fact that one of the Sinaloa cartel's highest-ranking operators was a woman who looked like someone's aunt isn't a feel-good story about gender equality. It's a testament to the organization's ruthless pragmatism and operational sophistication. She understood that in a world where everyone is looking for the monster, the most effective predator is the one who doesn't look like a monster at all. She moved billions, enabled countless addictions, and helped build one of the most powerful criminal organizations in human history. And then she traded her knowledge for freedom, vanishing into witness protection or quiet retirement, her name largely forgotten by a public that never knew it in the first place. The drug war has produced no shortage of villains, but it's produced very few victories. For every cartel leader arrested, another rises. For every trafficking route disrupted, another opens. For every operator like Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia who cooperates and walks free, dozens of low-level dealers serve decades in prison for possessing a fraction of the product she moved in a single week. The system isn't designed for justice. It's designed to manage an unwinnable war, trading tactical wins for strategic stalemate. So what do we do with a story like La Patrona's? Do we condemn her for the harm she caused? Do we acknowledge her competence while recognizing its criminal application? Do we question why the justice system values her cooperation more than accountability? Or do we simply recognize that she's a symptom of a much larger disease, a prohibition-driven market worth hundreds of billions of dollars, enforced through violence, sustained by demand that no amount of interdiction or imprisonment has ever reduced? She was invisible by design, dangerous by choice, and ultimately free by negotiation. The victims of her operation remain nameless. The addictions she facilitated continue. The route she helped build still functions. And somewhere, under a new name or in quiet obscurity, Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia lives with the knowledge of what she built and what she destroyed. Whether that knowledge brings remorse, satisfaction, or simply the relief of survival, we'll never know. She's done talking. The invisibility that made her powerful is now her protection. Share your thoughts below.